Jan, thank you so much for joining us here at SuperReturn International. If I could just start off by asking you to sum up really what you think the state of the industry is, if you like, especially in terms of these extraordinary geopolitical times we're living in.
Well, the industry have had, I would say, a great year. We have record fundraising, we have record sales, we have very good markets generally for investing, lots of capital coming into the private equity industry. There is a geopolitical uncertainty. It hasn't really affected the portfolio companies yet. I personally think that it's a bigger risk with the low interest rates that's been there essentially since the Lehman crisis. And I do think that that is an exposure for the industry and for the entire financial community. But geopolitically, of course, the US situation will actually create uncertainty. In financial terms, I do think that the US will do well, since the White House and now the Congress can be actually quite cooperative in getting a policy and an economic policy and an agenda. So things will happen. And when you have a strong line of command, even if you don't like the line of command, probably financially US will do relatively well.
So good times, but from what you've said in the past about this, good times have to end at some point.
Absolutely. I used the term that we are on drugs, and I do think that these low interest rates are incredibly artificial. They've been their lowest interest rates globally essentially since 1600s. It's not natural. It takes out the discipline and the cost of capital. And when corporates borrow with negative interest rates, and of course states, the Swedish kingdom, I'm Swedish kingdom, you pay 0.23 per annum to lend money for 10 years. You get less than a percentage per annum if you lend to 2040. It's not really a sustainable situation. And of course that will end at some point in time, and I don't think it will end well. But for the time being, the real return that the alternative assets industry and the private equity industry is generating to investors is fantastic. They're virtually not getting any yield of their state bonds. If you put money on the bank in the Nordics for the time being, if you have more than $20 million as a corporate, you're paying to just pay it in there. And of course, our assets are typically generating at least 10% plus virtually across all our products. So it's great for investors.
If it is good times at the moment and it is going to end at some point, what should companies be doing now to prepare for that? What should they be looking for in terms of opportunities and sort of what should they be aware of?
I do think that it's the traditional things when you invest. You need to diversify your risk. You need to do scenario analysis. You need to make sure that you have some capital to protect the assets when it gets more difficult. And then of course, I personally think you need to invest with underlying trends, particularly on the technology side. The fact that we all have our iPads and our iPhones, and you get entire internet exposure. And I think how we consume media, how we shop, change on a massive basis, on a daily basis. And I think you underestimate those trends. So if you identify those drivers, if you utilize the new technology on old school businesses, you can actually create a lot of value. But I think with record dry powder, as the industry have right now, it's almost inconceivable to go out and buy businesses sort of very cheaply and do a good deal on multiple expansion. And over the last 6 years, it's been a lot of multiple expansion. And I would say it's very, very unlikely that that would repeat itself. May even be multiple contraction going forward, since we are at peak levels when it comes to acquisition multiples. So I do think that you need to invest with the trend and of course identify those drivers, be able to identify them and then deliver upon them. And if you diversify your risk, if you make sure you have capital, you don't over-lever, I think you will land on your feet. But at some point in time, it will be painful.
You said there you need to do your analysis, and do you need to have good local geographic knowledge of these territories as well?
We firmly believe so. We have 15 offices around the world. We have 250 global operators. We use an operational network, and we think it gives us a tremendous advantage. We have local partners in each market. We firmly believe in being local because it's a cultural difference that is huge, and it's certainly also a legal difference that is quite huge. In Northern Europe, where EQT has the large part of its business, the unions are incredibly strong. Unless you know how to deal with the unions, you will crash and burn sooner or later. While in the US, it's a completely different legal system. You need to be careful there, punitive damages, other stuff. So you definitely need local partners that have been investing in that market forever. And if you were talking to me about deals in the Nordics, I can almost tell you any deal that's been done since 1980, which people like each other, dislike each other, which oversell and undersell, that's a huge advantage.
And in sort of an unstable climate geopolitically, that's even more important.
It is even more important, but I think that, frankly, I think we should be a bit humble. I think knowing when things turn is very difficult even for locals. There was not a lot of local people, even in the US, predicting Trump would win. And I think it's very difficult, even if you're a French person, to predict the French election, or a Dutch person to predict the Dutch election. So you need to be local because you need to be able to act fast. You need to maneuver when there is a crisis. You need to have a line of command and authority to actually act quickly. And I think that's more important, that you are mentally prepared, that you have done your scenario analysis, that line of command is clear, and when trouble hits, you actually act fast. So I personally don't think that the mere fact that you are local doesn't mean that you could predict, because it's just too difficult. We can explain why it didn't turn out as we thought last year, but very, very difficult to give plausible predictions for the year to come.
With that all in mind, is this a fantastic opportunity to have conversations with all those people? Because there's 2,000 people here and from 50 different countries. SuperReturn is quite unusual and unique in that sense, isn't it?
I think it's unique in sort of insight, and frankly, it's like a crash course on information and cross-fertilization. And myself, I have in 2 days now, I have 25 meetings scheduled. So it saves you a lot of traveling. You get to the right people and you get access to people you typically would not get access to otherwise. And I do believe that when you talk to a lot of people, it's an underestimating way of getting information. It's a bit anecdotal, it's less scientific, but it's very much, I would say, complement the scientific research we do on each asset and each investment. Because when you talk to all these people, to your point, they're very seasoned investors. They've been around for 30 years plus, making mistakes as I have, and they can tell you about that, and they feel it. Then this doesn't feel right.
And this is a people industry at the end of the day.
Industry. You're right.
And it's an industry that has evolved over the past 20 years. SuperReturn celebrating its 20th birthday this year. How has it evolved? What have you seen change in that time? And how has that affected the way that you operate? Because there's been a lot of talk about globalization at this conference, and certainly that's something that's happened in the private equity world. And if so, there's an awful lot more to digest than just the small operations that used to happen 20 years ago.
I agree. I mean, I've been doing this since '94, so more than 20 years, and I must say, back then it was very much virgin territory, and frankly, we didn't really know what we were doing. When I look back, how little we knew, I'm surprised we've done so well, actually. So it's much, much more professionalized these days. You have the debt situation, which is sort of more compartmentalized. Back then, actually getting financing was big part of the deal. If you just got a debt package in, you could just buy the asset and then throw it out a bit later. That doesn't work any longer. So it's been more standardized, but on the operational side, I would say that the industry has really developed massively. EQT has a backdrop. We started with an operational approach. I spent 10 years in the steel industry before I went into private equity in '94. So I was a steel operator for 10 years. So we've always had an operational approach. But back in '94, virtually nobody talks about operational aspects of private equity or industrial aspects of private equity. Virtually everybody is doing it now. I don't think everybody is doing it with greatness, but people have definitely come quite a long way. And of course, it's a huge industry, and I think the allocation to private equity keeps increasing, and I do think that the model, the alignment of interest with investors, the sense of urgency, the governance, the change, the rational view on investing, questioning what we did yesterday, I do think that that will take share to the public markets, because it's very rare that the public markets have complete alignment between the management team and the board and the owners. And we typically always construe that in our situation, and we take the rational view. And sometimes I think that public boards, they're a little bit afraid of, they don't dare to be logical sometimes, because it's too much politics into it. And we don't really have that. We're actually looking for true value creation and drive growth in our businesses. And that I think the industry is doing relatively well. So I think we will continue seeing a share for the alternative entries to increase. And of course the hedge funds at the moment has a bit of difficulty to deliver what they are charging for. So I think the hedge fund industry is shrinking a little bit. It shrank massively last year. It's continued to shrink in January. But let's see.
So that's looking a bit back to the history of PE and this conference. Let's make you look forward now, which you always love making predictions, don't you, that I can hold you to in 12 months' time. So it's going to be a crazy year again, because we've got more European elections in terms of the geopolitical climate. What do you think is going to happen, and what are we going to be sitting here talking about in 12 months' time?
I frankly don't know what the outcome of the elections will be. I sincerely doubt anybody knows. But of course we have a couple of difficult elections coming up. France, of course, being an important one. Holland, Germany. I do think personally it's important that Mrs. Merkel gets re-elected, because we need some stability. It's just too much geopolitical change, and I think Mrs. Merkel is a steady hand. For the industry, I think it will be another year of good profits for investors. That is what it seems like. The interest rates are still low, particularly here in Europe. They rised a bit in the US since the election, but I still think the real return will be a good year.
And what conversations do you hope to be having here in 12 months' time? Do you imagine they'll have changed much from what you're talking about now? And what do you hope to take away?
Over the last few years, it's been a massive growth. I think it's 2,500 people here. I think 2009 were we 1,000 or something. So it's more than doubled in this time period. And I would expect it to increase, because personally I think it's very well worth spending the time being here, because you get a lot of insight and you get a lot of connections and you get a lot of ideas, and it's a very efficient way of meeting up.
Great to meet you too. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.